We to hand over our glory and power to someone else? How happy are we for someone to rise up who might supplant us? John Israel, right? And he's not being like Esau here, handing over his birthright rashly for a bowl of stew. Rather, Jonathan seemed simply to be acknowledging that God was in control, and whatever God decided would be fine with him. He loved God enough to let God be God. And so in the covenant established between David and him in chapter 18, he very humbly handed David all the vestments that he wore that identified him as the crown prince. He says, you are my friend, and this is not going to come between us. If God means for you to be king, then let it be. That seems to be what he's communicating there. And so there's a principle of brotherly love for the church here, isn't there? As it was with Jonathan, it remains for us. Brotherly love doesn't mean relinquishing responsibilities we ought to fulfill. Jonathan still fulfilled his role as prince very valiantly, fighting. In fact, a war is going to come up again, and they go out and they fight again. And Jonathan would have gladly served as king if that would be his calling. But what brotherly love does mean is it requires a readiness and willingness to support and empower others who are being raised up by God. In other words, the goal of every church member should be to exalt Jesus Christ, not ourselves, not to advance our kingdom, but his. And we should therefore be ever shining the spotlight upon Christ and not upon our own wisdom and talents. And therefore we ought to be raising up leaders of the church rather than exalting our own usefulness. Right? You couldn't possibly do without me. I'm so smart and wise and godly. The church would surely perish if it weren't for me. Right? We have one taker in that sentiment. Now, nobody would ever say that out loud, but how many people say that in their hearts? Well, they just don't know how lucky they are to have me around, right? As if it was the kingdom of me, right? And God really meant for the whole church, like the whole reason it exists is to exalt me. And pastors can easily get that way too. We can get territorial about the church. And when we do, we forget that the church is actually Christ's territory, not our own. He owns every single square inch. Most of us have probably witnessed the sad and sinful spectacle of church members who get territorial about things like tables or chairs, pots and pans, Sunday school rooms, church supplies, church closets, roles on committees, solos in the choir, who gets a key and who doesn't, who can use the church van and how they use it, and so on and so on and so on. The list could go. The territorialism is part of the human heart, right? We see it in wild animals, and if we are not sanctified, we'll act like those wild animals.